Today I have an important topic that I want to share with all of you, and it has to do with basking in the light of God's love, of knowing that the fullness of God dwells with you. But before I get into that topic, let's just look at the passages that are provided for you today. We have here in the book of Haggai actual history being written. This book is very much in tune with the situation of the time. The people of Israel who have been in captivity in Babylon have finally returned home. And they look at their broken down ruins of temple. They are crying, they are weeping, they are terribly sad because their place of worship has been desecrated and they don't know where to turn. They're confused, they're bitter, and they would like, if they could, take out their vengeance on someone. Now we have some characters in this story. We have Prince Zerubbabel, who is leading the people of Israel back home and giving them a sense of government. We have Haggai, who's a prophet, and we have Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, who plays as high priest. And all of these characters get together and say what the Lord tells them to do, which is get to work. Quit crying, quit looking at the desolation that's before your feet, and begin to resurrect the temple and build it anew. And what you will build will not be the same, but it will also still be a testament to my glory and power in the world. Now in 2 Thessalonians, we have a letter written by Paul. And what's happening in the early Christian community, you have to picture roughly that we're talking about 40 years after the death of Jesus. They're expecting him to return. They're looking for the parousia, the second coming. And it's not happening. And the faithful are beginning to lose their faith. And Paul is saying that that event won't happen, and then what he does is he makes a reference to Jewish apocalyptical references in which he talks about the Great Revolt. And most of you know that as the Antichrist in our tradition. But I personally don't believe any of this stuff at all. And again, as I have told you before, I don't believe in a parousia or a second coming. I believe Jesus came, he told us what we need to do. And all we have to do is do it. And when we finally achieve doing it, we will see Jesus face to face. That, to me, is what the parousia is all about. But having said that, Paul says, until that great revolt happens, when people lose their faith and have no faith in God, that is the time in which you will finally see Jesus return. In the meantime, he says, enjoy your fellowship, work hard together, facilitate your love for one another, be the living example of a temple of God to the world. And finally, the Gospel of Luke, a story I like to laugh at. I just can't imagine meeting 7 wives after I've been gone for a while. I just can't. I don't know what I would do with that situation. But you have to understand the Jewish mentality of the time. The Sadducees do not believe in a resurrection at all. The Pharisees do. And Jesus is asked to comment on this. What happens, he says, according to ancient Hebraic tradition, when a man dies, his brother assumes his wife so that the name can carry on. Well, now if he has 7 brothers and each of them do not have a child, and they meet and marry this lady, whose wife will she be eventually? To all 7? And Jesus makes an important point. Marriage is for this life, not for the life to come. Marriage is for today, not for tomorrow. Instead, we will be as like the angels. We will be living in a different context, in a different need that is required, in which we will be closer to God than we were while we dwelt here on this planet. He's talking about life of spirit as opposed to life of the flesh. In flesh, we need companionship. We need someone to talk to. And for me, someone to help me with my supper. You're supposed to laugh. I don't know about you people. So, Jesus says it's different. And then he says something very important. He says that God is for the living. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. He lives through his generations who follow him. And he is faithful to those who live, including those who have died but are with God. Okay? All right. Basking in God. Discovering the fullness of God in our life. And there's one simple point I want to share with you today. Live out your purpose in this life. Work for what you want this world to be. Get to work. Get involved in your world as best you can where you think you might make a fundamental difference. And please don't sit there and wallow over the depressing state of the world. I realize things are bad. Heaven knows I see it in the church budget. The oil sector has collapsed. People are divorcing. I have people coming to my office and telling me such things. I have young families that are struggling to get their kids through school with very meager resources in terms of the financial welfare that they have to provide. I see it with the farmers this year. They're also crying. It's not the year it could have been. But it's one thing to sit there and look at the devastation and be overwhelmed with it. It's another thing to be able to say that despite the devastation we see, there's always next year. There's always an opportunity that things could change or be better, provided that you get involved and use the energy and the tenacity of your will to make it happen. You want what you want? Go get it. Go to work. God has given you talent and ability. Use it. Exercise it. Make the future now, not today or in the past, but into the future. Make it happen as a reality by which you can know that you have not been abandoned by your God or by life. I know lots of people who have gone through transition in death, divorce, financial crisis. I've seen it all. I myself have gone through some of those problems. And yes, I know what it's like to worry. I understand what it's like to see nothing but a black hole. But you can't give in to the force of death and negativity. I know it's easy to do, but you can't. You have to look for the small blessings that can carry you through life. You have to count whatever it is that can be positive in the midst of your darkness. I can tell you one thing. Ever since the oil boom collapsed, I can find a parking space. You don't know how many times I would drive around a block just to parallel park. Now I can just drive right in and drive right out. Change your perspective. Go to work. Work and make it happen. Don't sit there and look at the devastation and be overwhelmed by it. Because God is with you. God is with you in what you do. God is with you in your work. And in your work, you give the creativity that is His. Remember that. Number 2. Would you please quit looking for the parousia? Stop looking to the sky for Him to drop down and to save us all. Your life is in front of you, right here today. Make the best you can. There is no miracle. There will be no pushing away of the demons of our world. There'll be no way in which we can win against man's inhumanity to man. But we must remain determined to do whatever it is we can to level the playing field. And all of us have that ability to do it if but we would work. But don't look for a divine intervention. Don't look and hope that a miracle will happen. It's amazing how many times I get asked to pray for a miracle. And I want you to know there's nothing wrong with that. God wants to hear all of your requests. But at the end of the day, when I pray for a miracle, I always leave it in His hands to make it happen rather than what I expect. Because if I live with what I expect, it's not going to happen. It's amazing how miracles will happen when you give up your expectation and just let it happen. Instead of demanding what I want, I take what God will give me for what I need. I don't need Jesus to come down and rearrange the world. I already know good from evil. So do you. I know what I think the world should be. I don't think I'm all that far off about what the potential for that world could be. I don't think you are either. If I may for a moment, during the Second World War, since we're coming to Remembrance Day, we need to remember this. There were many people who thought we shouldn't go to war. There were many pacifists who suggested that we should never take up arms against Adolf Hitler and his Nazi regime. There were many people who preferred to stay home, not do the work that needed to be done, not because they were afraid, but because they were pacifists. They believed that we should live in love and forgiveness and dialogue rather than killing each other. But there does come a time, and all of us know this, where we have to draw a line in the sand. And sometimes it means doing the awful business of war and conflict. Now, if everyone had decided not to stop Hitler, what would the world have been like? Yes, it is true that many lost their lives, and we also know it was a long and difficult conflict. But we also need to know the reward that came out of that conflict, and to know that the sacrifice that was paid had to be paid in order for us to enjoy the freedoms that we have. And no one sat there and waited for the divine to save them. We had people coming from the Depression, farmers who were caught in a severe drought, sending their boys off to war so that the world could have peace. And we are still engaged in that great conflict. Look what happened with the fall of the Berlin Wall as an example. If it had not been our persistence during the 50s and 60s and 70s to remain against communism, we would never have seen that wall collapse. But because we persisted in defending human rights, and because we sought to find a position of defense to contain the expansion of communism as best we could, the wall collapsed. Because the dictators did not have the money to continue the battle against a most acceptable idea called human freedom and dignity. We didn't wait for Jesus to come. We did the awful work, the terrible work, the massive slaughter, so that we could perhaps enjoy peace in our time. And finally, my last point. You want to bask in God's love? You want to know his fullness? God is with the living and not the dead. Because you see, the dead are not dead. They've gone back to God from whence they came. For all of us are a piece of the divine. We come from God and we go back to God. There is no death except as a transition from this life into the life that all of us hold in our hearts to be true. And I know that many of us have doubts and fears about what's beyond the grave. Sometimes even I question it. It's not always strong in my conviction some days. Like the Sadducees, I probably could say, yes, I don't believe in a resurrection, but I tend to side with the Pharisees more. I tend to side with Jesus' point of view, and I know that there is still a world waiting for us when this life is done. Because God is for the living, not the dead. And God wants to dwell with you as you work, and when you die, bring you to a life that is from everlasting to everlasting. Amen.